there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at historic Rockwood, walking along the grounds, taking in all the beautiful sights and all the fresh air. But did you know that many of the trees that are planted around the house were planted on purpose and have a history? We're going to share it with you straight ahead. One of the first things that you notice when you come to Rockwood is just how naturally beautiful it is. And we wanted to take a deep dive into the history of some of this landscape architecture. And we're joined now by Ryan Grover, who is in charge of everything here at Rockwood, to give us a little bit of a primer on exactly the history of the area and what it takes to keep it up. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's a tall order. Thank you for coming back. It's good to see you again.
So for people who may not know the history of Rockwood, this is a beautiful historic, place that people visit all the time just for that reason.
Absolutely. We're probably best known for our gardens, and so much, in terms of museum sort of practice, a lot of times people sort of really try and emphasize the building. And our building is exceptional. It's great. It was originally built in 1851 by a guy named Joseph Shipley, local Quaker that made a lot of money in the cotton trade of the 1820s to the 1850s. And he came back here to retire, back to his hometown to retire. And so the house behind us is the house that he created. But what a lot of people don't quite understand is that he also created a 6-acre garden space that surrounds that house. And that garden has not really changed a lot in 170 years. And so this, we're in a position to be able to give a lot more emphasis to it.
So we are on the north lawn, is that right? And there are special trees here. Tell me about that.
So Joseph Shipley set out this particular lawn, this particular area. And I should just back up for a second. The fact that Joseph Shipley was creating lawn spaces in 1851 was unheard of. Back in 1851, most people, if they had this much land, they didn't plant lawn. They planted corn and grains and other things that could produce for their families or for some sort of economic advantage. But to create a pleasure place, a place of pure leisure, a place to be able to, like Joseph Shipley, collect trees from all over the world and put them out in this sort of romantic display, this was very unheard of in an American context.
So he was sort of an arborist.
Very much so, yeah. And we use the word horticulturalist, broadly speaking, because he had a lot of interest in plants. This was sort of his vocation in his retirement. So he not only collected rare specimens from all over the world, and he had this whole network of people that were helping, that he would trade with in order to be able to get these specimens here to his estate in America. But he was also, he was a prize grape grower. Oh. He had a vegetable garden for the house. He kept 3 different greenhouses here. He was just really interested in the natural world, in the idea of landscape.
So tell us a little bit about some of the specimens that he planted here and why he chose them.
So some of the most mature trees that we have here in this particular portion of the park were ones that were probably planted by Joseph Shipley, like I said, about 170 to 150 years ago. Some of the specimens that we have here were also things that were planted by his descendants that took over the house after about 1892. And they're terrific. So we have a lot of specimens that are from Western Europe, especially from England. We do have some native plants that are here, but we also have examples that come from as far away as Japan.
Mm-hmm. Now, did he keep records of all of these things? I know that you have one of the most vast records and documents and artifact collections that I've ever seen. So did he say, August 15th, I planted this, cypress or whatever? I mean,
it's less of a log of when things were planted and more when the plants were purchased.
Oh, okay.
So we have a really good set of receipts about what he was buying, what local nurseries, for lack of a better word, were selling them to him. So things that were coming from Southeast Pennsylvania, from the Philadelphia region, from New Jersey, he was going to all of these spaces, buying up these trees, and bringing them here in order to be able to plant them.
Now, as far as the layout goes, I mean, what kind of, I guess, schematic did he have in mind? Is it just so he could stroll through the space or have parties, or what was he planning? What was the layout?
Probably a little less about parties and more just kind of so this is what we call the picturesque landscape, and it's meant to sort of allow for people to sort of meander through what appears to be a very naturalistic landscape, but really this is really highly cultivated. So what should be a very rocky sort of landscape here in this particular part of Wilmington has been leveled out with these sort of flat lawn spaces so that it's really easy to create paths and walking spaces. And then, like I said, just to create these sort of panoramic views that you'll be able to see lots of different kinds of specimens in the landscape. Make these comparisons between different kinds of trees.
I know when you drive up, it's just like it opens up, it's beautiful, you see all these trees and everything. And it's hard to believe that some of these trees are 170 years old.
It's true.
How do you keep them healthy? Do you have you must have a program for all that.
So we are part of Newcastle County government, and they have a fantastic forestry group that helps to sort of maintain some of our oldest and most mature trees. But unlike museum practice, where we try to stop time entirely, here we try and work with time. So for instance, if we know that a tree is getting to the end of its life cycle, we manage the tree. We manage an inventory of trees here. So for instance, we have this terrific, what we call a Nyssa, or a black gum tree here in the North Lawn. And it's getting older. We know that it's over 150 years old, and we've planted its replacement right now. That replacement won't be mature for another 50 years, but it's planted and it's ready to go.
Sure. So a lot of planning goes into making sure that it stays as beautiful as it is right now for generations to come.
And that we're still able to tell the story of the full range of those of the kinds of plants that Joseph Shipley and his descendants tried to add to the park here.
So if somebody wants to find out, about each one of these trees, do you have like a brochure, or do you, have it on your website? Or?
So there's a brochure here that at the museum that you can get that will talk not only about sort of like key trees or key trees and shrubs in the park, but also talk about some of the sort of interesting architectural elements that are here as well. So not only the house, but other kinds of buildings that I'll show you in just a little while.
So if you're into trees, this is the place to come and check them out.
It is.
Absolutely. So now we're going to go and talk about the walled garden when we return.
Hi, I'm Laura Fravel. I'm the Sewell C. Biggs Curator of American Art at the Biggs Museum of American Art, and I enjoy art on the 302.
Welcome back. We are now in the walled garden, and Ryan, this really is a very serene space.
It's one of my favorite areas in the estate, for sure.
So when was the walled garden created?
So a portion of this structure, the barn that's behind us, was probably actually before Joseph Shipley in 1851. It's what was called a British bank barn, and it was part of an earlier sort of colonial period farm that was started on this land. But starting in 1851, he started to develop that barn into what would eventually be a carriage house and a space for like keeping horses, like a stable. Mm-hmm. And then he enclosed this garden probably about the same time. And this was originally a working space. This was a place that was supposed to be walled off so that when you and your friends were walking outside of the garden, you wouldn't have to take a look at all of the work that was happening inside of here. Mm-hmm.
So what kind of work was done here?
So the space behind us was actually a vegetable garden that was the primary vegetable garden for the people that were living in the house. And the spot that we're actually standing on right now were two greenhouses, actual total glass buildings that were constructed in the 1850s. And one of them was Joseph Shipley's grapery, his collection of grapevines.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's really wild.
And it has been redesigned. We have a really beautiful square with a fountain in the middle. When did that all come together?
So one of Joseph Shipley's descendants, a guy named Edward Bringhurst V, in the 1930s, he took out the vegetable garden and he added the rose garden that you see here. And so we've been maintaining those rose bushes for a really long time.
Now there'll be people at home, because a lot of people do roses, and there are all kinds. Do you know what kind of roses are in the garden?
So the one that we sort of specialize here is a what's called a trailing rose. It's a rose that sort of grows and then just sort of becomes this big kind of cloud of rosy pink petals. And I think that the thing is called Dr. Van Fleet style roses. They're not as popular today, but they used to be very, very popular.
Are they fragrant?
They are, but even more importantly than the fragrance is just this incredible pow of color. So, I mean, you really do see these enormous bushes growing around here that can be 6 to 8 feet tall, and they just trail on for yards and yards and yards across this sort of chain trellis that you see behind us.
Now you have some really large, I don't want to say they're bushes, but they're maybe trees. I'm not even really sure.
They're technically called like a yew tree, sort of a British variety of an evergreen that were planted here again in the 1930s, and it's part of that specimen collection of trees that you find all over the area.
When you come in here, there's one really special little place where it's off against the wall, there is a bench, and it's just really lovely canopy. So it's kind of like, you know, you have different areas that are, you know, different in terms of the atmosphere and the space. You've got the roses, then you've got this really quiet, reflective space.
We're sort of known for, how do you say this? Like Rockwood is known for getting lost. The way that these sort of picturesque landscapes are set up is that, yes, you do have these sort of broad views across fields and across lawns and things of that nature, but then your path structure sets you up so that you always are turning to one direction or another and discovering some brand new, undiscovered little nook of the garden. The problem is that unless you take a little bit of string or some breadcrumbs, you could get lost. So enjoy, you know, spend a little time with us. But yeah, the space that you're talking about, again, a couple of mature trees that have been growing in this area for probably close to 100 years now, and they've created this perfect canopy. Kids love it. They come and climb on the trees, and it's just, it's really, really, it's like a fairy tale.
And I guess, you know, as you're progressing in your landscape architecture plan, to spot something like that and say, this would be really good if we put a bench here, you know, we could grow it out. I mean, so you guys are always thinking about new opportunities and new ways to use the natural beauty to enhance the visitor experience, but yet keep historic significance, right?
100%. And one of the things that we feel, or we've been identifying through strategic planning that we're lacking here is some kind of nod to the agricultural past of this estate. So we have this 6 acres that have been sort of preserved for all time, but outside of that 6 acres used to be a 400-acre farm, and we really don't have much of a nod to that. And downtown Wilmington, where we are, really needs that in terms of access to that kind of information, access to that sort of, that little branch of history. So we're thinking about developing spaces not too far from the house where we'll be able to take individuals and tell them about the kinds of fruits and vegetables, grains that used to be planted here. And maybe even create sort of experimental garden spaces where people can really sort of experiment and have fun with this idea of growing.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like a future 302 show.
Maybe several.
So whenever you come out here, I mean, it's not just beautiful, it's also functional. You guys have weddings in the carriage house. Tell me about what this space is used for throughout the year.
So the idea of this particular, the walled garden is used specifically for a lot of receptions, and we try and keep it fairly clear. We do have some great structures. I mean, it comes with its own structure because the beautiful sort of walled area that surrounds this sort of square area, and we maintain the path structures and such. But we try to stay sort of minimal to be able to utilize the lawns as much as possible, and then we try and sort of maintain a lot of that architecture as best as we can. This particular area, and I don't mind telling you this, it's a little bit of a preservation challenge because there's a lot of masonry here, there's a lot of stone, there's a lot of wall structures to maintain over a long period of time, and it's challenging.
So you have a lot of to-do lists.
We have a long to-do list.
Absolutely. So now we're going to go to another space. Where are we going to go next?
We are going to go to the south lawn. So this is the opposite side of the house that you'll actually get to see the front of the house.
Fantastic. And we're going to go check that out when we return.
Hi, this is Rebecca Duffy, Curator of Education at Reed House and Gardens, and I always watch the 302 for the best events in Delaware.
Welcome back. We are on the South Lawn now, and the thing that I love about being out here, besides the fact it's so beautiful and there's so much history and we get to hang out with our best friend Ryan, is that the sound, birds, it's so soothing.
Yeah, it's really, what do they call it? Forest bathing. Like this is literally like in the middle of it all, and you can just sort of take this second and kind of meditate and just kind of clear your mind. And it really plays into this idea that we're having about Rockwood being a retreat, a place to sort of get away from everything around it.
Absolutely. So we are on the South Lawn, and you can see it's a beautiful, picturesque view of the house. But talk to me a little bit about this space.
So this is also part of that 6-acre garden space that Joseph Shipley had put together. And this one is particularly interesting because it presents the front facade of the house. This was the side of the house, even though it wasn't the side that most people would enter as guests, it was the side that the family spent the most money on. All the windows that you see across this facade really were the most expensive component of the construction of this house back in 1851. A lot of that plate glass would have to be sort of imported from out of country, and it was just a really, really expensive venture to do something that was this open with the fenestration. And so even to this day, descendants of the family that lived here still refer to this as the front of the house. But the only people that ever saw it were individuals that were in this particular garden.
So what would happen here, in the time of Joseph Bringhurst?
This was probably a little bit more of an entertainment space. We probably saw, there were a couple of sort of platform areas that were constructed where you might be able to sort of have little dinners and little teas and sort of have your friends over. There was great access to the conservatory, the attached greenhouse to the house from this area. And this was also part of that collection of trees and other kinds of plants that Joseph Shipley was bringing to the estate.
So when we look around, we see it's not just this beautiful open expanse. You guys have set up some additional features for people just to come and luxuriate. We've got some benches and...
We have, absolutely. And I should point out, this is the epicenter of all of our festivals. So during the summer and fall, when we host a lot of different festivals, both for Newcastle County and outside groups, this is kind of where it happens, here out on these large-scale lawns. And
you have, it looks like some, if it were to rain, some coverings you can go and hang out in. And I don't know if it's a pergola or what you would call it.
A little gazebo.
A little gazebo. And everything, and it's just really cool, very walkable.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's probably what this was originally designed for. When you come, finding the trails is really easy, and they're not particularly hard or treacherous to get across. I think that they were really meant for just kind of enjoying the afternoon and taking a little stroll. And it's the same trail system here that Joseph Shipley designed 170 years ago. Literally, nothing's changed here.
So you can grab your dog and you can come on out, maybe bring a sack lunch and just go exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we could just, take a little break right now.
Absolutely, let's do that. No, we have a couple more minutes. So you mentioned dogs, I mentioned dogs too. So you have a new feature on site, right?
Yeah, so we have the historic nature of this garden, and we really try to protect that infrastructure, that particular landscape architecture, and tell stories about it. But we also are always trying to add a little things here, sort of pepper in new sort of features. In the past we've talked about the apothecary garden, which is kind of just over my left shoulder. But we also have just installed our own fenced dog park, which is just outside of the carriage house event space.
So let's talk about that apothecary garden, because it's right next to like a sleeping porch, right?
Yes.
So first, let's start with the garden, and then what is the sleeping porch?
Well, the sleeping porch was, it's the west end of the house. It's the wing of the house that was added on in 1913. And it's in what at the time was sort of described as a Japanese style of architecture with these really wide overhanging eaves over the roof. And it was meant to be really shady. It was meant to be very comfortable. It was a place to be able to take the breezes and such. But eventually, the family started to refer to it as a sleeping porch because it was outfitted with curtains and couches, and it became this real lounge space. When you're up there, it's an enormous area. And then it would overlook the sort of west end of the house. In recent years, we developed the west end of the house as that apothecary garden, and it has this really distinctive crescent-shaped path and sort of fountain in the center of it. But all the plants that are there are medicinal, and they're all native plants.
And the connection is that the family used to be into pharmaceuticals?
Absolutely. So the Bringhurst family started an apothecary, sort of an early idea of a pharmacy down on Market Street in downtown Wilmington in the 1780s.
So it's just amazing how you honor every bit of the history of this place with new things and reviving old things. It's just really inspirational.
Thank you. But there's a lot of good stories to work with here. We have good bones.
Absolutely. So if somebody wants to know more about the space or about the events, they can go to
Rockwood.org and get all the sort of basic information, but there's really no substitute for just coming and taking a look. One of the great things about the place is that even if you're not that interested in museums, the gardens are free. You can just park and roll around, take out some of the brochures, get some information, take out some of our signage here in the parks, and just enjoy yourself.
And when are you open?
So the gardens are open anytime that it's daylight, but we are open Thursday through Sunday inside the museum.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Come back anytime.
We certainly will, and we'll be right back. Are you enjoying our stroll through Rockwood? If you come here in person, make sure you snap a few pictures and share it with us on Facebook. Now, here are some other things you might want to check out. For more information on the grounds at Rockwood or any of the exhibits or events they have here, make sure you visit rockwood.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of the 302. Make sure you follow us on Facebook to get behind-the-scenes content you're just not going to get anywhere else. We're going to leave you now with some beauty shots from around Rockwood. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.